Hey, what's up guys? In this tutorial, we're going to be using two different types of shatter effects. One we've already looked at before, and then we're going to be using a new one called pixel poly, which is a more simplistic but very useful effect. Along with that, we're going to be using the text animator in order to have per character text animations, but we're going to be creating something that looks like this. So basically what I have there, I have the regular shatter, but the pieces look like they're staying on the ground, which we haven't really looked at before, but you can manipulate it just by using some pre-comps and doing some time remapping. So if that sounds interesting, let's get started. Alright guys, let's get started with the composition. So I'm just using UHD 4K, 30 frames a second, and 150 frames will be fine for this. First thing I want to do is make a new background, so I'm going to grab a new solid, grab a fill effect, and for the first one we'll just leave that red, duplicate this, and then we're going to open up our ellipse tool, double click, and then we're going to set the blending mode to add. Then we're going to go up to a lighter color, click F for feathering, and feather this out. Select both layers, pre-compose them, call it background. I'm going to grab a curves effect, pull this down a little bit, lift the shadows up. So we have something that's a little bit less saturated now. That will do just fine for our background. So the first thing we want to do is make some text. Alright, so for the animation, what we want to have is strong come down and just bounce a little bit on top of brittle. So click P for position, pull this up, keyframe this, and we'll just go forward 10 frames and have it come down and land on the top of brittle. And what I want to do is go forward 2 frames, then pull this up a little bit, and then go forward another 3 frames, 1, 2, 3, and then just pull that back down. So then we'll get a little bit of a bounce, and then we can do it again. Something like this, okay? And then during the bounce, we want brittle to react to that. So for this, we're actually going to use something a little different. Open up the text layer, select animate, and we're going to animate the scale. And the way this is going to work, this is a text animator. So basically what the text animator does, allows you to animate individual letters according to a specific channel and a range. So what we're going to do now on our scale, we're going to unlock scale, and we're going to keyframe scale at frame 10. And then as strong comes down, we need this to react. So we're going to go down maybe, let's say 15%. So we'll go to 85, and then we'll go forward 3 more frames, and that will go back up to 100. So this is going to kind of react to that. And then when it goes up again, I'm going to have it go maybe to 95, and then forward again, back up to 100. So every time strong bounces up, brittle is going to bounce down. It's going to looks like it's a little bit springy. But because this is being scaled on the y-axis, we need to do the inverse on the x-axis in order to maintain mass. So we've gone 15% down on the y channel, so we need to go up 15% on the x channel. So we'll do 15, and then here we'll do 105. So we've got something like this. So that just makes it look like it's reacting. And what you'll notice with the scale here, it's scaling each letter individually. If you were to scale the entire layer, it would scale the layer as one uniform object instead of each of its separate components. Okay, so the next thing I want to do, I want strong to start sinking down over brittle. So we can do this over the next, let's say 20 frames, grab strong, and then we'll slowly let it come down maybe about there. And I'm going to ease this animation in and out. So click the graph editor, separate the channels, and then we're going to just ease this in. And we can ease it out as well. And then brittle is going to have to be scaled accordingly. I'm going to pull this down so it matches. So that's 30%. So add 30% on the x-axis. We are going to have to ease in this as well. So ease in these. Using these. And while it is being squashed, I want the letters to shake as if they're struggling to support the weight. And the way we can achieve that is with a separate range animator. So here what I'll do, I'll click up here, click animate, and I will select rotation. Now, when you click animate, you have to be selecting something above the range selector, like the animator or one of these other attributes. If you were to do the same thing, go up to like position or something, it will put it in the animator that you have selected. So make sure if you want a new one, you would click up here and then you get another animator. So on the range selector for the second animator, this will allow us to control it in a little bit. But what we want to do on the rotation, you'll notice that as I rotate this, the letters are rotating based on their center point, but I want them to rotate based on the floor. I'm going to grab the pan behind tool and then just simply move the anchor point down to the base right there. And then when I animate now, they'll animate from that new anchor point position. So what I want to do now is add an expression to the rotation channel. So I'm going to hold down the Alt key, select the stopwatch, and we're going to type in an expression. Type in wiggle, and the first parameter is going to be how many times a second you want this to go. So we'll say 4, and we'll do a comma, and then the next one is going to be the intensity, or how many degrees this will rotate. We'll say 4. Click the numpad enter key, and then we've got something like this. And this is going to be pretty consistent. So it's going to change 4 times per second up to plus or minus 4. But what I want it to do is increase both the frequency and intensity as time progresses. And the way we can do that is simply multiply time by those constants. So we'll say 4 times time and then 4 times time. So now it's going to increase in intensity and frequency as time progresses. But you'll notice that this begins right at the very start of the animation. I only want this to start at around maybe frame 15, maybe even 20. So what we can do here, go to the very beginning, enter down once, and we're going to use an if statement. So we're going to say if, open parentheses, time to frames. First parameter is time. The second parameter is your frame rate. So in this case, it's 30. And then we will compare that to the current frame. So we'll say if it's greater than, let's say 20, so after frame 20, this can begin to occur. All right, so with the expressions here, you don't need to put a curly brace, but if you want to add any more lines of code, you do. So let's just do it just in case. We can close it like that. So that's pretty good. Okay, so here's what I want to do. As strong crushes brittle, I'm actually going to take these keyframes and pull them a little bit further, so it's going to start crushing brittle faster. But then I just want to hold it just for, let's say, 10 frames or so. I want it to pause, then I want brittle to shatter. All right, so that looks pretty good, but what we can do, go back into text, go back into the animator for number 2, range selector, and let's turn on under advanced random order. And then what we have here is a start end position. We can set that to 0, and then we can manually start animating this at frame 20. At frame 20, it will be off, and then by frame 40, we'll say this is 100%. But as we progress through that, some of the letters will start shaking before other ones, so they're not all going to be perfectly in sync at the beginning. Makes it look a little bit more natural, that not each one is reacting exactly the same. All right, so now what I want to do is at frame, let's say frame 40, I want this to switch and then shatter. So what we're going to do, duplicate this layer, call the one on top shatter. Take the layer underneath and we're going to trim it. So you can either just pull this in, or you can do Alt right bracket. And then on the brittle shatter, I'm going to pre-compose it. We have to pre-compose layers that have the shatter effect on it, otherwise we wouldn't get to choose precisely where this shatters. But we want to freeze this position. So we're going to go time, freeze frame, and then we can move this over so it starts there. Then I'm going to add a shatter effect. Switch the view to rendered, and you'll see right at frame 40, this will begin to shatter. Okay, so let's change some of these settings here. So the first thing under shape, let's do stars and triangles. Quite like that one. Repetitions, we can increase that to something like 30. Open up force 1, change the strength to 1. Open up force 2, and we'll just zero these out. Next thing I want to do is create a new solid, and we're going to use this as a gradient. This is going to be our shatter gradient. Add a gradient ramp effect. And we're just going to scale this layer down so it fits just over the words. Grab the start position and change the start position of the ramp to about there. That'll be okay. We can turn this layer off. And on the shatter, what we want to do here under gradient, change the gradient layer to shatter gradient, do source effects and masks, and then invert the gradient. So now what we can do is animate the shatter threshold. Keyframe this, go forward 10 frames or so, and we can set that to be 100%. So this will start it breaking from the top, and then it will fall. Open up physics. We'll change the mass variance to 0, just so this all the pieces will start falling at the same rate. Gravity, we can change that to something pretty high, like 20. And now we have something like this. All right, so here for the origin, we can place this origin like right there. So the cracks start maybe around the center right there. I'm gonna lower the radius very slightly. All right, so now what we need to do is alter the shatter threshold. After about 5 frames or so, we need this to be at about 50%. Then we're gonna have this stop. So what we have to try to do, and this is gonna vary depending on what you are trying to create or how large the text is. I want the shatter to kind of stop at around here. So all the pieces can remain looking as if they're on the ground. And the shatter effect just goes on forever, but if we can trick it to make it look like it's doing that, we'll get the effect we're looking for. So at around frame 45, this is all right, but we probably need to increase the gravity. So let's double the gravity to 40. And then we're gonna actually scale this down. I'm gonna click the S key, unlock the axes, and then we'll animate the scale. We'll go forward 1 more frame, and we'll change the anchor point, grab the pan behind tool, right into the very center of that debris, and then change the Y scale to something like 50, and then just let that come out a couple more frames. Maybe move these over 1 frame, something like that. Then it will be resting on the ground, and we've achieved more or less what we're looking for. There's also randomness. So if you increase the randomness, you'll get the pieces to look like they're more spread out a little bit, more like resting on the ground. You could even scale this down a little bit more. Okay, so at this point, if we want this to stop, we need to pre-compose this layer as well. We're going to call this shatter stop, and then you have to move all attributes into the new composition. So we'll trim this here, alt right bracket, so then it will just disappear. But then what we can do, go up to layer, time, freeze on last frame, and then after that, it will always be held. So it kind of looks like everything came to a rest. So all we have to do here is lower strong down to the ground, do something like this, go forward 2 frames, lift it back up slightly, go forward 3 more frames, and we'll just copy this original keyframe and paste it. Okay, so now what we have to do is just make sure that strong doesn't start crushing through brittle before brittle breaks. So in which case, just go about halfway and then lift up strong again. Pull this back up here. Something like that. You may also want to test this with motion blur. So enable motion blur for the composition, enable the motion blur switches. But that looks pretty good. All right, so if that's the effect you're looking for, you could just end here, but I want to show you another technique of how to shatter text. I'm going to have a larger piece of text come and crush strong, and it's going to be done in a slightly different way. So in order to do that, we're going to grab a new text layer, and we're going to type in stronger. Lift up stronger in this void area, and then we're gonna wait about a second. So we're gonna build up anticipation here. So click P for position, and we'll just do this over 10 frames again, and we'll just have stronger come all the way down and just go all the way down to the very bottom here. Go to the graph editor, separate the dimensions. We'll have this kind of ease in and then get faster and faster and faster. All right, so now it's time to start scaling down the lower piece of text. So go to strong, click S, make sure you unlock the axes for scale, and we're going to crush this down. So when stronger is on the bottom, this is really flattened. On frame 88, we're going to set a keyframe at 100%, and then we're just going to go to frame 90, and we'll just go down to something like 5%, and then do 195 to make sure we're conserving the scale. Click P, frame 88, make sure you keyframe the X and Y positions, go forward 2 frames, and just make sure that this is resting on the ground. Like that. So on this, make sure you have motion blur enabled on stronger, and then we're just gonna have to fix that gap in a moment. So on frame 88, we're gonna have to pull these keyframes inwards 1 by 1 frame. But now what we're gonna do, we might have to fix that gap in a bit, but we're gonna add an effect called pixel poly. So pixel poly is kind of like a simplified shatter effect. Now what you have to do, you have to figure out whatever the decimal point is for your current time. We're at 89 frames, which is roughly 3 seconds. It's like 2.95. That looks like it's about right. But this is going to allow us to shatter the text. And it's going to look like it slides across the floor when it shatters. So let's change some of the parameters here. For direction randomness, we can lower that. We want them all to be going more or less the same direction, but maybe like 30% is good. Increase the speed randomness. Lower the grid spacing so you get more particles. And then gravity, we're going to turn gravity off. And then for the force, we'll do something like 25. So here, what I'm probably going to do on stronger, I'm just going to lower stronger so it looks like it's hitting the top strong. And then strong is going to shatter. And then it's going to look like it's sliding across the floor. So because strong is moving so quickly at frame 89, what I want to do is keyframe its current position at 88, go forward to 89, pull this down a little bit so we can kind of customize where it's appearing. That looks a little bit better. All right, so the one disadvantage with pixel poly is all the pieces look very, very small, and it looks like strong is just collapsing it only into a few little tiny pieces, and the rest of it is just like magically disappearing. So what we need to do is add a couple more layers. Let's duplicate this, but when we duplicate it, we only want the duplicates to begin at frame 88. We're at frame 89, so at frame 89, hold down Alt and click the left bracket. We're just going to trim it to starting there. Then we'll get more pieces if we offset this just a little bit. So what we could do, go to our grid spacing. We could increase the grid spacing back up a little bit so we get larger pieces. We can also change this how much it spins, perhaps increase the direction randomness as well. Maybe even increase this quite a bit. And for this, I will use some gravity, do something like 0.25, just so those larger pieces don't just float around in the air. Maybe 0.2, maybe like 0.1. And because we're not getting any motion blur on this, we'll need to add a force motion blur effect. Pull this underneath pixel poly. So make sure you copy that same motion blur effect to the one underneath as well. And then you can add as many of these as you want. So I might add just one more, and maybe I'll do something like a grid spacing of 25 for this one. Change the direction a little bit, maybe lower the gravity, lower the speed, maybe a little bit, and the direction randomness, but it will just make it look like there's a few more pieces in there. All right, so we've got something kind of like this. It looks pretty good. I might go back and add a couple more layers just to make it look a little bit larger, but that's the general idea of using the pixel poly for what I wanted to achieve with this. Now there's a couple more things we can do to make this look a little bit better. If you notice on the original Shatter, there are shadows that are included. So what we can do to make these layers look a little bit better, well, the first thing we could do is add a bevel effect. If we do bevel edges, we'll want to do this before the motion blur. Increase your edge thickness, and that will make it look like some of the pieces are shaded. Paste this effect on here, move it above the motion blur. Same thing there. We could also add a drop shadow effect. Now the drop shadow effect, you can put this even on strong itself. And actually what we'll want to do here on strong, we don't want the bevel effect to be working. So at frame 89, we'll turn this on. So at frame 88, the edge thickness will be 0. And then at frame 89, it will be 50%. All right, so on strong, another thing we can do is add a drop shadow effect. So again, before the motion blur. And we could do something like a distance of maybe 10 pixels or so, and change the direction like 100 degrees or so. A little bit of a shadow there. It makes it look like it has a bit more depth. You could even do that on the brittle shatter pieces as well. Makes it look like they're slightly more grounded. Increase the softness a little bit on these. And like 20 is good. And what we'll do, we'll copy that and paste it on strong 2. And then on strong 3 as well. And then on stronger, paste it there. I'll lower the softness back down to 5. And what I want to do is stronger, since it looks like it's covering up those pieces, I want to make sure stronger is underneath all of these strong layers. So I'll just put it like underneath here. And then when this loads, you'll be able to notice the little pieces are in front of it now. Okay. All right, so that's all I wanted to show with this tutorial. Hope you guys enjoyed it. And here is the final result. All right, guys, that wraps up this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, drop a like. Have any questions, leave a comment. and I'll be back next week with some more content. Peace.